And so once Cholik gets him separated from the guards, the stone snake that he's, actually riding on the head of spits out this fire and separates him from the group and is like, "Time's running out for you, man. You pretty much have to do this now because if those two women die, you're screwed. You don't have time to wait.
Yeah.
But but I can make all this go away if you trust me." And it's like, "Okay, okay, fine, fine." So, he's getting really desperate and he actually follows Cholik in to the Black Road with him, into the giant gaping maw of the snake.
Mm-hmm.
And they find themselves up on this huge cliffside, on the trail. And down below, it's obscured by clouds. And up above is the actual top of the summit. And you actually get an in-depth look at what the Black Road is like because every time that you go on it, it's actually different. It's different for everyone. And in the midst of this, Lord Darkulan decides, "Hey, I changed my mind. Take me back. If you don't, I'm going to chop your head off with my sword." And Cholik looks at him and is like, "No, you're not. You're in my place now." And he grabs the sword and it cuts his hand and the blood's running down the blade and it actually heats up the sword and burns both of their hands.
Ooh,
But
weird.
Cholik is actually pretty much used to it now. He's like, "Yeah, I don't even mind it anymore. I'm used to this kind of shit happening in here. It's crazy."
Mm-hmm.
And sword falls off the side of the cliff and he's very desperate now. And so he's like, "Look, this is still your only option. There's no going back. The way is blocked behind you. You got to keep moving forward." And he tells him, "You know what? If you believe, then your hand will be healed. I'm not going to do it. Your faith is going to do it." And after it happens, he's like, "Okay, what's next?" But before they can really get into that, both of them fall off the cliff edge. It collapses beneath them, and they start falling into the abyss, as it were.
Uh-huh.
And what they end up landing on is very interesting because the Black Road actually takes you to a particular place in your memories. It will take you to your worst nightmare, whatever you fear, whatever you regret. And so Cholik actually ends up standing, on top of this marsh, like literally walking on the water. And he's kind of like, "So, Cabraxis, where are we now?"
Yeah.
It's like, "Oh, this is a very special place to Lord Darkulan. He's, all sunk in the mud and he's freaking out and yelling and, crying for help." And you see this dead woman wearing a blue dress, the who knows how long she'd been there, the skin, shriveled up into her flesh that's remaining and, essentially it goes from the past as it were, latches on to the Lord's back and licks the back of his ear and then bites into it. Just creepy shit,
Gross.
Not the kind of place you'd want to
No, no
be.
thanks. I'll pass.
And, he's yelling and screaming, and the whole time Cholik is still having this conversation with Cabraxis. Cabraxis explains to him that this was actually from way back in his past before he got married. It was a common girl that got pregnant with his child, so he killed her and dumped her body in the swamp.
Damn.
And now the corpse is actually pulling him beneath the water's surface, and he's, drowning. He's not going to survive this nightmare without me. And so Cabraxis, basically walks up in his, normal form, yanks him up with ease, with of course, the woman still on his back, chewing on the side of his face.
Ugh.
And he's just kind of like, "Well, you got two options. Either you swear allegiance to me, or you die. What's it gonna be?" He's like, "No, I'm not serving a demon." He drops him back in. It's like, okay, we'll see if he changes his mind.
I give.
Yeah,
She's
pretty
eating my
much.
eye. Get her off me.
Yeah, if I had a crazy psychotic corpse chewing on my ear, I'd probably decide, maybe this Black Road thing isn't so
Yeah.
bad. And just like happened with Cholik before, and it kind of talks about this as well, how Cholik could sometimes feel Cabraxis's fingers inside of his head.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very odd type thing. He plunges his, fingertips that elongate into the Lord's head and, actually restores him, as it were. And now you see him standing tall and proud and, no longer marred by the injuries. And oh, before this, of course, he actually backhands the corpse off of his back. That was pretty
Oh,
epic.
nice.
You can just kind of imagine him being like, back. But yeah. So now Lord Darkulin is completely into the fold and servant of Cabraxis directly. Not everyone is actually turned on the Black Road. Some people actually do refuse the way, and they end up dying and, being cast into hell itself to be tormented forever.
Right.
So it's not a very win-win situation once you're there. Now, back with Derek, he's still having this conversation with the sage that he just met. And the sage, pretty much offers him this, wonderful meal. It's better than what he would get in a week's time. You know what I mean?
Right.
And Derek's playing hard to get. He doesn't want to have anything to do with it still. And you know, has short, curt answers and a lot of questions he ignores, and he'll ask a question, and the sage is getting really impatient with him, like, come on, dude, give me something, And what really kind of sucks Derek into it is the realization that the sage is essentially hunting the demon down. That's what he does. And he does this because he had a very sad, traumatic story of his own. He had a wife and 3 children, and at the time he was a priest, and he let this guy in who was destitute. He hadn't eaten in several days, and it turns out he was just a lesser demon and ended up slaughtering his whole family. And he narrowly survived himself. He had scars literally all over his body, and this other priest actually patched him back together. So, yeah, he was not too fond of demons after that, and actually ended up hunting down at least 8 of them, one of which was the one that had done so much to him personally. So he actually found his way onto the path of Cabraxis. In other words, he figured out what was actually going on, and in his many, many books of research, he found that Cabraxis had existed all the way back, even as far back as the Sin Wars, and actually aided in the downfall of Inarius, although it doesn't go into much detail about that. And while, the 3, as we've seen in the video games, would actually raise an army of demons to fight mankind's armies, Cabraxis would raise an army of followers, believers, to fight. And that's why even the 3 feared that he would become too powerful. And one of the guises that he took on throughout the course of history was actually under the auspices of the barbarian tribes. He undertook the name Iceclaw the Merciless and led an army of the barbarian tribes up against the south. And he actually failed and was defeated by a particular man, but he had a very special weapon that allowed him to take him down. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had a snowball's chance in hell. And a lot of the story actually goes on from here to get into all that. The only other thing I'm going to mention in this particular show is what the rings actually signify, because the sage explains it. And the way that Cabraxis looks at it is that people have different layers of weaknesses, and that's what the rings represent, things that you can exploit within people.
Right.
The first was that people fear demons. You can immediately frighten someone and force them into submission, but they won't stay there. They're going to break away as soon as they can. It's understandable.
Yeah.
The second is people are greedy. You can tap into that. You can get them to last a bit longer that way. By the third, they get into covetousness. In other words, envy. You want what the guy next to you has.
Right.
And Derek basically says, well, unless the other guy happens to also be a follower of Cabraxis, right? And he goes, well, no, actually, if you're more powerful, then he'll just take it away from you and give it to your brother. And if Cabraxis finds you more worthy, and the entire time under the guise of, well, this guy didn't have a strong enough faith, that's why all these bad things happened to him. The fourth is greater fears, people who are dying and sick, and you're trying to care for your family, and essentially that first incident that we had where you had the little boy who was very sickly and he cured him.
Right.
And the fifth is that people actually do change on the Black Road. Those who actually do follow the path and end up becoming a servant of Cabraxis gain great strength and power and speed and, very demonic-like attributes that ordinarily you'd never see a human possess. And the 6 is kind of a mystery. It's the greatest fears, the unknown, and it seems like what they are alluding to is that's what happened to Lord Darkulon on the Black Road when he was haunted by that memory. And I'm assuming that's what it is, that it's the deepest, darkest secrets that you can utilize in order to force someone into subjugation.
Right. Crazy.
Yeah, but yeah, with this section we pretty much end with the fact that Derek does decide to join up with this guy, and they have their own little mercenary band that they're organizing together in order to find the sword and eventually wage war on Cabraxis himself.
Ooh.
So, tune in next week.
Cool. Yeah. Looking forward to that.